Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Building a Post-Secondary Mindset webinar. This is the third of 3 sessions in the Paving the Pathway to College and Career Post-Secondary Success series. I'm Ashley Campbell from REL Appalachia. I'm joined today by CJ Park and Karen Shackman, also from REL Appalachia. Our guest presenter for today is Allison Demnicki from the American Institutes for Research. Let's jump right in, starting with some terminology. This graphic shows how we're thinking about college and career readiness and post-secondary transitions. On the left, college and career readiness refers to the knowledge and skills students should have at the end of high school to be successful in post-secondary pursuits. Post-secondary success, on the other side of the bridge, occurs when students complete their training with the knowledge and skills to be successful in the workforce. For our purposes, post-secondary transition spans both sides of the bridge and refers to the process of moving from high school to college or career. Supporting successful transition begins in high school and helps students start strong in post-secondary pursuits. But why is this transition so important? Why do we focus here? And why should we focus on supporting students to make this transition? Research shows that students whom colleges deem academically prepared for college don't always make it to college. Between 10% and 40% of students who previously demonstrated their intent to enroll in college, for example, by completing their FAFSA and submitting an application, don't always show up to campus in the fall. It's hard to know who's responsible or who's best suited to help with this transition, but we can work to bolster the supports we provide to students to help get them there and help them be ready to be successful. That's the goal of this series, to build understanding and encourage the use of evidence-based post-secondary success interventions that improve transition to post-secondary education and training programs. This is the third in a 3-part series. If you missed the first 2 trainings, we'll share links to the recordings and associated materials in the chat box on your left and at the end of the presentation. Today's recording and slides will also be posted soon, so you'll have easy access to all the content and strategies we're sharing. There is no need to be taking notes furiously fast. It'll all be posted for you. Here is our plan for today. We'll situate how we're going to talk about social-emotional skills within a framework. Then we'll focus on growth mindset, academic self-efficacy, and school culture. Finally, our guest, Dr. Demnicki, will share some insights about situating all of this within your context or systems. Then we'll have time for questions before wrapping up. We want today to be as interactive as possible, so please use the chat to ask questions, offer suggestions, and share your experiences. I can see people typing over there, so thank you in advance. The focus of our content today is to define social-emotional skills for a post-secondary mindset and to identify strategies that support students to have a post-secondary mindset. Are there other goals you all would like to cover today? If so, please add them to the chat and we'll work to address them. We want to begin by learning a little bit about your experiences. It is time to share. So I think everyone should see a couple of chat boxes popping up. Think about the following 2 things. First, challenges and barriers to post-secondary transition. Enter some of your own experiences or of the students that you work with in the chat box below on the left. Then, think about what you needed to overcome those challenges. What skills and resources related to post-secondary transition are necessary for students? Enter those in the second chat box on the right. I'm going to pause for a minute and let folks think about their own experiences and the supports that they had to overcome challenges. So I'm seeing costs coming up, folks who might have been a first-generation student didn't get any supports, even if their counselor knew that they might need extra supports. folks not knowing how to decide what they wanted from college, how to figure out the process, a lack of parent and family support. Transportation is a big one, getting there. I'm sure that a lot of these challenges sound familiar to other folks listening in. On the skills and resources side, folks are suggesting scholarships and counselor suggestions were helpful. Scholarships, of course, help with financial aid, and we all know that you often need a counselor to help you identify those opportunities and navigate them. I see someone mentioning grit and coping skills. That's great. We'll touch on those today. Resilience is also part of social emotional learning that we'll touch on a bit today. Counselors play a big role in offering skills and resources. I see one more on the challenge that I want to mention, the fear about moving to a larger city. I'm going to give us about 5 to 10 more seconds to add some ideas here. And thank you all for participating. We appreciate it. I'm going to go to the next slide, and I don't think there will be any surprises on that slide, given this conversation that we're having. So what gets in the way of student successful transitions? Many of your experiences that you just shared with us are reflected in the literature on this topic too. Here are some of the barriers that are grounded in research. Confidence. Many students simply believe they can't obtain post-secondary education. They perceive too many obstacles or don't feel confident in their own abilities to obtain an education. Geographic isolation is challenging for some students. I saw one person mention transportation, so this is related to that, but particularly for rural students, they may experience decreased opportunities for learning because of their location. Localism is defined as a strong connection to where students live. While this can always be positive, it can also make students unwilling to leave their region, possibly reducing their opportunities for post-secondary education. Similarly, a strong connection to family, including family obligations, can lead students to not pursuing post-secondary pursuits. A lack of college knowledge is a barrier. College knowledge is an understanding of what options exist, what's required, how to navigate the system, the expectations and norms. Low levels of family educational expectations and involvement in children's education can also serve as a barrier to pursuing post-secondary education. And of course, financial challenges are often a barrier. We've talked about many of these barriers in our first 2 webinars. Today, we'll focus primarily on the social emotional barriers that prevent students from post-secondary education. We want to start with a working definition of social emotional learning as it relates to building a post-secondary mindset. This is how researchers often situate social emotional learning, or SEL. It's a very broad term and it has several domains. This slide shows the CASEL framework, which is well known in the field as a way of categorizing the components of SEL. They break down SEL into 5 categories, which you can see in yellow, orange, and green. The 3 outer layers in the blue represent settings in which students develop these skills: homes and communities, their schools, and the classroom. Our focus is on things you can do in the school or in the classroom, or things that are part of your context and system. While there are many things we can't control in the community outside of the schools, educators and counselors do spend much of the year with students in school. Schools and classrooms can have a big influence on students' social emotional preparedness, so we begin here. One side note, while your REL Appalachia presenters will focus on classroom and school strategies, our guest presenter will talk a little bit later about considerations for situating your work within a broader context or system. We're going to narrow today's strategies to the area in orange. Educators are sometimes concerned about student attitudes and beliefs related to post-secondary transition and persistence. The concerns we've heard from practitioners like yourselves are that students give up too easily, don't set goals, and don't believe they can achieve post-secondary success. These 2 categories in orange are self-awareness and self-management. Self-awareness addresses psychological barriers like low self-efficacy. Self-awareness refers to students' sense of themselves. It can be built up so that they can perceive themselves as worthy of further education to achieve academic and professional success. Self-management relates to the skills student needs to get things done. Once they have self-awareness and once they have the self-awareness competencies, they can work on self-motivation and goal setting in self-management. These are the only areas of social-emotional learning where these are not the only areas of social-emotional learning where educators can influence students and post-secondary transitions, but it is where we are focusing our discussion in this presentation. Within the categories of self-awareness and self-management, our presentation today highlights 3 areas of focus for post-secondary readiness. They are growth mindset, academic self-efficacy, and the role of school culture in supporting students' post-secondary transition, and particularly supporting them to have a post-secondary mindset. We'll cover each of these, their definitions, and strategies related to each one. Okay, so I am going to turn this presentation over to CJ Park, who will address our first set of strategies, those that support growth mindset.
Thank you, Ashley. So supporting students to develop a growth mindset is part of addressing their social emotional needs and building their post-secondary mindset. A growth mindset is a belief that abilities can be learned and developed through hard work and perseverance, rather than believing that skills and abilities are fixed and unchangeable. So why is growth mindset important? So researchers have observed many positive outcomes related to a growth mindset. These include increased resilience, college success, and in particular, benefits for students academically at risk and from low-income families. A recent study found that even a short intervention can have positive effects on students' mathematics achievement. However, a supportive and challenge-seeking peer environment contributed to these effects. While a growth mindset is the belief that one can improve current abilities, a fixed mindset is the belief that one's own abilities are unchangeable. The chart displayed here shows the difference between a growth and fixed mindset in the areas of challenge, obstacles, effort, criticism, and the success of others. As you look at the chart, consider how the young people that you work with fare along these different elements. In the following slides, we provide some research-based strategies related to promoting growth mindset to support post-secondary transitions. 2 ways to build a growth mindset are to praise the process and to teach students that intelligence is malleable. We will provide sample strategies for each of these on the next 2 slides. Praising the process can help students associate their efforts with success. In contrast, praising students for being smart suggests that it is a fixed trait, and that is the reason for success. For example, you might say, I liked how you tried a few approaches until you found a way to solve the problem. You wouldn't say, great job, you're so smart. This suggests that students may benefit from strategies that support them to focus on the process rather than the product. Possible ideas for doing this include encouraging students to focus on the process to solve a problem over the product, encouraging students to embrace mistakes as part of the learning process, talking up strategies and efforts by having discussions around strategies to solve problems, and reassuring students that struggling is part of the process of learning. Consider when you have praised the process. Are there times when you observe student performance or effort? What kinds of language could you use to help build a growth mindset? If you guys have some ideas about how to build a growth mindset, you can enter your thoughts in the chat. We want to hear kind of what you might have to say. I see multiple attendees are typing, so I'll give a minute for folks to share kind of what they think are good ways to praise the process. You haven't learned it yet? Yep, that's a great idea. That although you haven't mastered something right now, that it is something that you can and will master. Celebrating each milestone. Kind of not giving students markers along the way to celebrate success. Plaster the walls with these quotes and mindset. Yes, giving kind of reminders to students. Providing a safe space. Those are all great ideas, and I really appreciate everyone sharing. Another sample strategy is to teach students that their brains can change. Two possible ideas that we have are, one, to have students watch or read a video or article about the topic. Sometimes when they hear it from their parent or their teacher, they might not quite believe it, but if maybe they see it somewhere else in a video or see a researcher or someone talk about it, they might have a little bit more belief in this idea. And then after students have learned about the malleability of the brain or the importance of goal setting, kind of asking students to write a letter to their future selves that they can read if they find themselves struggling with a class in college. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to talk about self-efficacy.
Okay, academic self-efficacy. Let's start with a definition so we're all on the same page. Self-efficacy in general is a belief that we can succeed. Academic self-efficacy is the belief that we can do well on academic tasks. It's important to note that we can have self-efficacy in different areas like math, science, or reading, and much of the research you'll find in academic self-efficacy is subject-specific. The focus here is on academic self-efficacy because it has been shown to be a good predictor of how students will do in post-secondary pursuits. Why do we want to help students strengthen academic self-efficacy? Well, researchers have found that students' self-efficacy for academic achievement influences their academic goals and academic achievement. College students, in particular, their academic self-efficacy is related to academic adjustment in college. So this might help them adjust better and persist longer. Academic self-efficacy is also linked to the choice of career and academic major. Students have higher self-efficacy in subjects where they've had previous success, which makes them more likely to choose careers in those fields. So, for example, students might have an interest in engineering, but they will be more likely to choose that major or career if they've also had experiences that lead them to report higher academic self-efficacy in engineering. Also related to this, if students may not know what their interests are until they try something and then find out that they're successful at it, that could steer them toward a career. Lastly, students with high academic self-efficacy often enjoy a wider range of viable career options because their ability to complete higher levels of education. Staying and persisting will open more doors for them. So where does self-efficacy come from? How do students acquire a sense of self-efficacy? This graphic illustrates the different contributions to a student's self-efficacy. Some of you may have seen this before. It's a well-known organization by Bandura. Here are the ways we obtain self-efficacy. Mastery experiences. These are the ones that say, I've done this before, so I can do it again. You have to try something once or twice to make sure to know that you can do it, and then you're confident doing it again. Vicarious experience. If you see people like you who are doing something, you feel that you too can probably do it. Social persuasion. Well, everyone else believes I can do it, so maybe they're right. If others believe and show confidence in you, you will have more confidence in self-efficacy for yourself. Visualization. I can imagine doing the work that leads to success. So it's not necessarily that on my visualization board there's a boat and I'm going to get the boat, but how I'm going to do the work to get the boat. So visualizing the work. Physical and emotional states. So when you're nervous to go on stage or to do something, you should reframe your anxiety as excitement, for example, helping students to say, these are natural feelings and you are excited to do this. You can do it. Knowing the different sources of self-efficacy can help guide your thinking about how to cultivate it in your students. We're going to offer more concrete samples in the following slides. These are strategies that relate to all of the bubbles that we saw on the earlier slide. Mastery. A lot of these strategies are about breaking tasks down into manageable pieces so students can feel mastery with the first piece, which will build their confidence with later pieces. This relates to setting milestones, having incremental success, or beginning with something simple first. Vicarious experiences, modeling. Modeling an activity for a student can provide a vicarious experience, where they see another young person completing a task or achieving a goal. This can be an effective way to build efficacy. Peer tutoring, for example, where a student can see that a peer helping them has mastered the activity, can build their self-efficacy. Group work also provides an opportunity to see peers work through problems and see it possible for themselves. Social persuasion. This ties back to celebrating incremental successes. It can also just be the words of encouragement. So every time you tell a student, "I know you can do it," you are actually helping build their self-efficacy. Okay, let's break down some of these strategies more concretely. These ideas are likely not new to you. These are things that you do in your work all the time, but you may not have thought about them as a means to building self-efficacy. First, having students create a roadmap and milestones toward a goal can be valuable in building their self-efficacy. It can help break down daunting tasks into smaller pieces, allowing them to build mastery as they go. For example, doing this for the steps in a college application process allows students to see a series of incremental steps that can be helpful in supporting their sense of accomplishment and self-efficacy. So instead of saying, 4 months from now you will have applied to college, you break it down into when they submit their application, when they do their essay, when they get letters of recommendation, and each of the pieces on a timeline so that they can see progress toward their goal. Here's another one. Modeling. If students believe that someone like them has done it before, the vicarious experience again, they believe that they can also do it. Applied to post-secondary preparedness, this might mean bringing back graduates from their school or to share their own stories, or you share stories about other students' previous successes. You can serve as a model too. Okay, one more. Teaching goal setting. Effective goal setting. Evidence suggests that goals should be attainable, timely, and specific. I think we've all probably heard about the need to set SMART goals, goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This applies to building self-efficacy as well. It's important because if students set unrealistic goals and fail to meet them, their self-efficacy can actually decline. Guide students to set goals that are somewhat challenging but not impossible, that are timely and specific, and focus on mastery. Help students set their own goals and figure out the steps toward meeting those goals. Let's pause for just a minute and consider some of these ideas. We've talked about a roadmap, a timeline for goal setting, modeling, and setting SMART or reasonable goals. What are some ways in which students have exposure to these and ways of promoting self-efficacy? Have you done some of these in your own work? Do you have suggestions to share with the group? I'll pause for a minute and give folks a chance to enter some things in chat. And like I said before, I'm sure that these are things that you all do in your everyday work, and being intentional about them and thinking about individual students and helping grow their self-efficacy will help us and help them. It's just being intentional about our focus. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on, but we will watch for suggestions in the chat. Feel free, of course, to enter suggestions and questions you might have and ideas throughout this conversation. I'm going to turn this back over to CJ, who can give us some insights about how school culture relates to students' social-emotional learning.
Thanks, Ashley. Supporting students to develop a post-secondary mindset requires more than just the work of an individual teacher with an individual student or an individual counselor with an individual counselee. In fact, many of the strategies outlined here relate to creating a culture that supports students to pursue post-secondary options and building a post-secondary mindset within the school and not just within individual students. A school culture that supports students transitioning to college and other post-secondary training opportunities is one that builds in the expectation that post-secondary education is for all students, not just for the best students, and it supports students in achieving their goals. The College Board's Creating a College-Going Culture Guide lists a number of characteristics of schools that have a college-going culture, such as expect all students to be capable, being prepared to enroll and succeed, providing a range of post-secondary tools and resources, embracing the social, cultural, and learning diversity of students when developing opportunities, involve leaders at all levels in establishing policies, programs, and practices, maintain the resources to make these goals possible. And then finally, regularly assess the effectiveness of their efforts. Many of the strategies already presented across the 3 webinars in this series relate to the goal of creating a college culture that supports students to make a successful transition to post-secondary. In the next slide, we highlight again some of those key culture elements, particularly related to mindset. So some school culture strategies include create a culture of high expectations for every student and be explicit about these expectations and how they relate to post-secondary success. Collaborate with institutions, community organizations, and employers to ensure the transition is smooth from high school to post-secondary, and also to be sure that the post-secondary mindset doesn't stop at a school doors building. The community contributes considerably to a culture that sees post-secondary education as available to all students. Engage families early and often. Have counseling sessions with students and their families, host evening events for parents, employ the PTA and other meetings where families gather to convey information and share resources. Hold frequent events and make use of existing events to spread the word and build a post-secondary mindset among the larger community. And finally, identify and use data to determine where students are in the process and what programs and policies are most effective. These data can help you to target students and also to know where you can improve. I'm going to shift now by introducing our guest speaker for today, Allison Dimnicki. Allison B. Dimnicki is a principal researcher at AIR, American Institutes for Research, and she has extensive experience in social emotional learning, implementation science, systems change, measurement and methodology, evaluation design, and mixed methods longitudinal research. She has particular expertise in research on school and community-based programs. She has also helped develop social emotional learning, school climate, and readiness assessments, and led systematic reviews, expert panels, and consensus building approaches. She has provided training and technical assistance to schools, staff working in federal agencies, and staff working in state education departments around evidence-based programs, multi-tiered systems of support, and translating research to practice. We are very pleased to have her here today to talk about systems to support social emotional learning and post-secondary transition. Take it away, Allison. Yes.
Wonderful. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about the comments and the conversations in the chat box, and I want you to all continue to think of questions to ask myself or to ask my other colleagues who have done a wonderful job framing and setting this all up for me today. I wanted to talk for a few minutes around how to think about what has already been mentioned in the context of systems. And the first slide here is a slide that was introduced before, and it's the CASEL framework again that has the 5 different social emotional competencies. And what I really want to highlight here is the idea that you always need to consider the individual student or the individual teacher or staff member and the extent to which they have these different skills in the context of the instruction taking place in the classroom, the norms and the culture and the climate of the school, the other practices and routines and policies you might have, as well as the partnerships that are present between the students and the teachers and the school community and their families and the broader community partnerships. So I really want to highlight that all of these ideas around self-efficacy and the growth mindset exist within this context of the larger classroom, school, community environment. And there's a lot of reinforcement of these ideas that can be done by people that aren't necessarily serving the role as classroom teachers, whether that be administrators or district staff or parents, etc. I also want to talk a bit about something else that was mentioned earlier that has to do with school culture strategies. And the slide before had put these up, and here you see now that two of them are highlighted. And the first that's highlighted is collaborating with post-secondary education institutions, community-based organizations, economic development agencies, and employers to help create smoother transitions to college and the workforce. And I've listened to the other two webinars in this series, which I hope you all have had the chance to listen to as well. And if you haven't, I know the recordings are available. And there was a really powerful moment in one of the earlier webinars that was an actual college advocate, a fairly young person who was working directly with high school students and had the opportunity to grant high school students admission on the spot to certain colleges based on these students meeting the criteria set forth by the college. And the college advocate talked about how this experience, this half an hour, hour-long meeting they had where they could say, hey, you actually meet all these criteria and you've been accepted into this state school in Virginia, opened a whole new pathway for the students, and it reshaped the way they thought about their future. And they had never considered themselves a college-going person before, and all of a sudden they had been told, yes, you are in that pool of people that is qualified, that is ready, that is, has the right skills and has the right credentials for college. And I really feel like this idea of collaborations with these different other institutions, organizations, agencies helps to create these pathways that are critical to success. I also want to highlight here, and I know that REL Appalachia does a fabulous job about talking about not just post-secondary opportunities as being four-year colleges, but as being a broader definition. And so I really think it's critical for all of you on the webinar today that work with partners like businesses that could create internships or other ways for youth to get work experience and to have really helpful opportunities that give them a sense or a sample of what the workforce might be like in this field, and help them to understand if a vocational school or some other kind of training program would be appropriate. The other part that's highlighted on this slide is identify and use data to support students and families. I think this is critical in the work that I do, and to give you a sense of my background. So I am, for example, doing a very large study in 46 schools in Colorado that's designed to promote school climate and to reduce school violence. And one of the core components of the approach we're using is around helping to increase the capacity of school teams to collect, use, and see the value of data. And they're using that data in a lot of different ways. They're using it to identify what the needs are of their students. They're using it to identify what the strengths are of their community. So they're both using it to say, as a whole, this school has, for example, really strong partnerships with community-based organizations, or they're also using it to say, this specific student really needs this type of individualized support. And both of those types of data, the individual level and the school level data, I think are critical. And I think these kinds of things really help to promote the secondary success and help to make sure that students don't slip through the cracks, and that as a whole, a school has this culture of college readiness and has this, this approach that's used. I also think data can be really helpful here because you can use the data to say to your students, and others, you meet this criteria. You have the credentials that you don't think you have, and it can help to change their mindset about what they can do with their future. So I always love at the end of talks, and I love being the discussant, to say this is a lot of information, amazingly helpful information from my co-presenters, but it might feel overwhelming. I often have the experience of attending webinars and saying, whoa, that was a lot, what do I do now? And I think there's different places to engage and to start. And so the first thing I say and recommend is to collaborate with others to create these smoother transitions and to put the pieces together, to figure out what the short-term quick wins could be. And so, you already have this partner that you just haven't had time to set up a call with, or you haven't figured out the right way to really form a partnership that would be lasting and help your students or your school community. And that one is just on the list as an easy one to start to move ahead on. And you want to also have some longer-term goals, some things that I would love a few years from now to have this in place. And how can I set up a plan and have some steps along the way and some indicators that would help to do that. So I can give a great example in some of the work that I do to say that in the schools I talked about in Colorado, they have some short-term goals, like, for example, it might be having all of their staff receive some training on trauma-based approaches, or on self-efficacy, or on the growth mindset. And there could be some longer-term goals, which is to say the idea that you really want to have a school climate survey demonstrate that students have a growth mindset or have positive feelings about academic self-efficacy. And those are, different types of goals, and different steps would be taken to accomplish the idea of having data that says, look, students in my school really believe that they have the skills and they have the competencies they need to pursue post-secondary options. I wanted to move a bit. The next few slides are actually highlighting some of the conclusions from a brief that I wrote several years ago, and the reference for the brief is listed on the last slide that I'll present, so you will have the link to it to find it yourself. But I think from my perspective, I do a lot of work in systems change and in figuring out how the system can support students and staff and communities. And I think there's other pieces that are important to just mention here in case people are interested in that as well. And so in the brief that I wrote, we also dove pretty deep into talking about standards for social emotional learning and how statewide standards, district standards could really help people to see the value of that, whether that be people as in other school staff that might not be on the bandwagon that social emotional learning is important, or whether that be parents or other community members. And to really consider the equal value of these types of skills. And then the other point here is talking about providing support to help teachers, district level and school level practitioners create these linkages between content standards and SEL skills. This brief was written several years ago, and now there's somewhat of easier linkages made because of the new ESSA guidance that came out that really does say the importance of strategies to promote non-cognitive skills and to promote these kinds of ideas. So I think you really have some grounds to stand on here to focus on this and to convince others that this is an important idea and concept to incorporate into your classroom instruction, into your school routines, norms, etc. Another part of the brief talks about policies, programs, or structures that help high school graduates meet expectations. And one of the points here talks about how providing guidance to districts and schools helps them to develop comprehensive social emotional learning supports and programs. I think a lot of times it's easy to say, oh, I'm just going to pick a social emotional learning program and that's going to solve all of these needs and problems that I'm hearing are happening. And it really has to be part of a cohesive, integrated approach that feels manageable and isn't so many different pieces people are overwhelmed by it. The second bullet here mentions fostering these collaborations, and it's really talking about this, the transitions from different school settings, so maybe from elementary school to middle school to high school, as well as beyond, that high school to post-secondary. And I think that's critical. I think that has come out in other webinars you've done, and I really want to continue to say that one of the key takeaways from all of the work I do, whether that be in multi-sector collaborations led by local health departments, whether that be in after-school programs, or whether that be in schools themselves during the school day, is really this value of collaborations. And I really think that the more lasting relationships you can have that really support these kinds of ideas are critical for the youth and the school success. The last part of the brief that I wrote talks about how do we know when high school graduates meet expectations. And this really speaks more to the idea of evaluation or continuous monitoring. I think these two bullets mention providing planning time and professional development to help teachers gather data. I strongly, strongly believe in the idea that we really want to build the capacity of all of the people on this call, myself. I have so much to learn to reflect on what we're doing, reflect on our current practices, to collect information to understand what we're doing well, where we could improve, and to continue to use these data to inform classroom practices and school-wide routines, rituals, and other ideas. And the second bullet mentions sharing promising practices and program evaluation results from schools across the state to develop a body of evidence. So this speaks more to the idea that in order to elevate the field, we really need to have evaluations from schools that can then be aggregated up. And to try to say across the state, this is what this kind of work is doing, and this is what it's leading to in terms of outcomes. And I think that all of you on the call today can be representatives of the schools, the districts, et cetera, you're working with. Several of you probably have social emotional learning standards in your states. I think there's about 28 states right now that have those standards in place. So several of you are probably in those states that have those standards present. Okay, so the other resource I'm going to highlight is one that it was written by colleagues in Canada. And this is a little bit different, but I thought it was helpful to mention and describe quickly for people that are excited about diving deeper here. The reference is called Ways to Enhance Post-Secondary Academic Persistence and Success. And the report is split apart into 5 different sections. The first part of the report talks about student resources that promote academic persistence and success. And several of them were actually already mentioned today, which is exciting and really aligns with what we talked about. There's a few others that I thought would be helpful to highlight. So the ones that were already mentioned have to do with academic self-efficacy, the growth mindset, and social emotional competence. They also mention different ways to, different student resources that appear most effective, such as students' educational learning goals, and the idea that students who are looking to acquire knowledge and skills and are open to new experiences, are motivated to and interested in learning, are more likely to succeed in post-secondary opportunities, as well as study skills, which I'm sure you've heard about before. The second section of this report talks about aspects of teaching and learning that seem to have considerable long-term impacts on student engagement, progress, development, and success. It describes 5 factors, such as designing courses to promote student engagement and development. The second factor is facilitating learning in a way that engages and helps students integrate, transfer, and deepen their knowledge, and gives them a means to take charge of their own learning, development, and success. So I think these ideas are really interesting. Like, it's kind of like looking at different sides of the coin. One you can think about the student approach, one you can think about the teaching and learning approaches. And I think both are helpful for all of you to consider. The third section here, which is on this slide, is how study programs contribute to academic success. And it mentions measures that can help students persist and succeed in the first semester or year of their program, such as identifying students who are struggling during the first semester and supporting them through mentoring, peer groups, or other approaches. I'm just going to look at the chat box for a sec because I know we're a little bit ahead of time, and I'm giving you a lot of information right now, and I don't want it to feel overwhelming. So I just want to see if any questions have popped up here that might be helpful to answer before I keep going. So Peter Alexander mentioned, keep updating as I reach more students, but I include their thoughts about how they learn best, all the way down to how they get to the school center, what they have for Wi-Fi, et cetera. I think that's great. I mean, I think that more that we can include student perspectives. I meant to highlight that earlier, so thanks so much, Peter, for the comment about that. I really think these efforts should be very much driven by what you're hearing from students and different ways to collect that information, but really they're a key contributor here. Let's see if there's any other comments as I continue to go. I think that's it for now. So then I'm going to move to the next slide, which has the last two sections of the report. These two sections might not be as relevant as what we're talking about today, but still interesting. The fourth section has to do with characteristics of schools that have high student success rates, and just describe some of the things that are in place in those schools. They mention ideas such as the schools having a culture of learning and academic persistence, promoting not just academic skills, but the overall development of students, which is very much in line with what we're talking about today, as well as having high expectations that encourage students to improve and excel. I feel like that really resonates with what was talked about earlier by my co-presenters, this idea that high expectations that really help students to think about themselves as succeeding and really think that they're going to be held to these standards and accountability are critical for us to help students see themselves as being competent and able and really deserving to be part of these post-secondary opportunities, whether they be in college, four-year college settings, or whether they be in vocational training settings. They have to see themselves there, and they have to believe that they have what it takes to succeed in those environments. And the last part of the report mentions that some input from influential experts, John Hattie, George Koo, and Vincent Tito. And some of them are pretty concrete insights. So John Hattie, for example, describes 8 steps that should be undertaken and completed in each school. Again, it mentions the ensuring expectations about student development and progress are high and realistic. It mentions the importance of teachers and school administrators being on the same page about what progress looks like, and some other ideas there. So here are the links to both of those, and I think also they were put into the chat box for you. And I'm really excited to hear more. I have lots of stories to tell about things happening on the ground, but I also want to have this Q&A section be really guided by what you're interested in hearing about. So I'm going to stop there and say that I'm happy to talk about any or anything that we've already mentioned. And if I can't answer it, I will for sure find someone who can and get back to you.
Thank you, Allison. That was very helpful. And you're right, it is a lot of information, so we want to remind folks links will be made available, and we have an opportunity now to ask some questions. Briefly, here is Allison Dimnicki's contact information if you'd like to reach out to her directly with questions also. Okay, so this is an opportunity to get some questions and answers, and just as Allison said, if we do not have the answer, we will get back to you. So I have a couple that have come in that are pretty interesting. The first one, we are living in a pandemic. So what are we doing and what can we be doing to support students with social emotional preparation for post-secondary and to make that transition given the pandemic and COVID and that so many students are remote?
So I can answer that question, Ashley. So we have this is CJ. We actually held a webinar in May that addressed this, and Ashley will post the link in the chat. And one of our guest presenters suggested finding ways to make students feel part of a community, because that's something that can be lacking in this remote environment. And also finding ways to make sure that students know that their fears and anxieties are normal, that kind of any uncertainties, any kind of like feelings of, oh, this is challenging, that's perfectly normal in this context we're in. We also had the suggestions from school counselors about using not just text, but Facebook, Instagram, virtual office hours, just different mediums to try and connect with students in this pandemic age. Also, I remember a different webinar where a particular counselor talked about how she actually encouraged some of her counselors to make phone calls to try and reach students, and so which is quite uncommon nowadays. Mostly kids are texting and things like that, but that a phone call could be a different strategy that you take to try and reach out and reach kids.
That's right. I posted the link to the side, and of course, if you all are doing this hard work in the midst of a pandemic, so if you have suggestions for one another about how to reach and support students, please post those there so we can all learn from one another. I have another question. So both Allison...
Ashley,
oh, yeah, go ahead, Allison.
Do you mind if I hop in there too? Because I've actually done a few webinars on this, and I think it's another thing that's critical is just being mindful of what is and isn't realistic or appropriate right now. Of course, we still want students to be learning and growing and developing. Of course, we still want, we really want to make sure, I know there's a lot of talk right now about the learning loss, and I really don't like that language. I study a lot of social emotional learning and positive youth development, and I'd so much prefer as, the idea of thriving students and not this learning loss idea. But I do think that it's really helpful for all of us to just be cognizant and realistic of what students are experiencing and going through, and whether that be in their home situations and environments or the challenges of technology and working parents and other things, access to resources, a lot of the disparities that are becoming clear through COVID. And so I feel like there's, in my head, as a developmental psychologist, there's of course we want students to learn, but how can they learn without having some of these social emotional needs met? And I think that's just critical, for all of us to just sit back and think about. I hear frequently that teachers that are trying to teach right now during COVID are, have students that just aren't showing up, that are ready to learn or excited about learning. And that's, really hard for them and really hard for the students themselves. And so, I think we have to just have this balance about learning and social emotional preparation and and everyone's trying to do this together and trying to learn together. So there's, different strategies and skills that I'm sure that can be shared to try to do that balance.
So as we mentioned earlier, keep sharing your strategies because we would like to learn from one another, and we'll watch the chat. I have another question that might be a little harder, but both CJ and Allison mentioned how important it is to look at data when supporting students. What data do you recommend people use to identify students who might be struggling with social emotional skills or coping or may not be ready to transition to post-secondary? How do we know which students are struggling and that we should be supporting and targeting?
I can jump in first, and I'd love CJ to piggyback on with her ideas as well. So surprisingly, a lot of you probably have many different data sources you're already collecting that will help provide insight into this. And some of you might not think about these as data sources. Some of them might be required surveys to collect. So you might have a district survey that's around school climate or school culture. You might have like some modified version of the youth behavior, risk behavior survey. And a lot of these are district or state level kinds of things. And you might also have school-specific surveys that you're collecting. Frequently, many of these surveys will have some measures or constructs or outcomes, all different terminologies for the same kinds of things that get at social emotional competencies and learning. So I would say definitely start there and figure out what you're already collecting. And then if you're not collecting something that could fall into some of these buckets, I think it's for sure important to figure out what you could start collecting. And I'm really cognizant of Peter Alexander's comments that it's very hard to flip everything that's happening right now, to change all of schools' routines and practices during this time. You can't, move a huge ship very quickly. So I don't want you to take on the world and start collecting 10 new surveys right now and think that it's going to be easy to pull off. But I do think that you could start collecting some shorter surveys. I'm happy to put in the chat box a link to a lot of compendiums that have social emotional learning measures included, and maybe that's a place to start.
Sure,
and I see in the chat lots of agreement with you, Allison. Lots of agreement. Go ahead, CJ.
I was going to say, just to build on what Allison said, kind of thinking about data you already collect rather than collecting new data. If you're already working with students on, college planning initiatives, college planning, or filling out some sort of sheet saying what their plans are, you could just try and track that sort of information. Those aren't necessary social emotional measures per se, but they could help you see what kids are kind of on track or not, or students whose parents come to events or not. Those students might be the ones to reach out to. So, not just focusing on those students who are coming and asking for support, but also just those that are not.
That's right. I think that's important, CJ, that with the absence of questions and the absence of participation is good data to tell you who is not engaged and who might need an extra bit of support or whose parents are not showing up. I would also encourage folks to not think of data so formally. There are a lot of, especially now, informal data sources that just checking in with students and asking how they're doing, looking around the halls that you can gather that you know being in the building. Okay, I'm looking to see if we have any additional questions in the chat. I had one more. What are some practical strategies, Allison? You're working in so many schools in Colorado and in your previous work. What are some strategies you've seen on the ground that you think are particularly innovative or effective?
It's a great question. One of the things I really wanted to highlight here is the idea of being ready as a school, even as a classroom if you're a classroom teacher, to engage in some of these. So I feel like a lot of times we think, and I understand why we think this way, that we have a problem. We see that kids are being bullied, and we want to just pick a program and start to train teachers on it and have it be done. And I think there's some steps that have to happen before that, you know what I mean, in order for us to be ready for this, for the investment made in that program to really pay off. So there's quick and dirty strategies, if that makes sense. There's the evidence-based programs that are for sure have been shown to be effective in supporting student social emotional preparedness. So, for example, CASEL has like a model guide around that. RAND came out with a report about what effective programs are after looking at a lot of the after-school. I think Wallace came out with an after-school set of programs that are around that. I see the most successful types of strategies and activities that are effective are ones that help students connect with teachers and other students and other school community members in deep, meaningful, trusting ways. So less about the specific name of a program, less about saying, oh, everybody should go out and buy this program, but more about things that allow for people to have meaningful relationships and people that they can count on to get advice from, and mentors, and positive peer relationships, and peers that encourage them to do pro-social things versus encourage them to engage in risky behaviors. I think it's really critical when we're talking about social emotional competencies to also think about the need for staff to increase their own social emotional competencies. I know it's hard to teach something that you don't fully understand or don't have a lot of background in. And, I myself am still learning social emotional competencies. I don't think any of us are experts in a way. So I think that another thing I found really effective is to have these kinds of approaches start by training the staff in schools in these areas. And I'm happy to answer more. I see some more comments coming in here.
I think we've covered questions. If folks have any more, feel free. We can jump back to question and answer if you... Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Thank you, Allison, for those answers. That was really helpful, and CJ and everyone for jumping in. The more voices we can get, the more we can learn. So how can we continue this journey? I'm going to start wrapping up, but I want to tell you, if you are thinking of sneaking out, jumping off, please take the survey on the left. There is a link there, and your feedback is really important to us. So now that we've concluded this session, we invite you to think about what specific strategies or considerations you might employ in your context. We've been asking folks to share all along, but is there anything that you've thought of today that you might take away and try? Please share those ideas. If there was something new today that you heard or something that you've already been doing but it's now risen in relevance for you in hearing our discussion today. Feel free to write your thoughts in the chat. Also, we have some other resources, and Karen will post the links in the chat, resources to previous webinars, things that you can check out on your own that can give you more ideas. REL Appalachia puts out a lot of information, as do all of the other 9 regions in the country that can be targeted to your states and localities, and lots of information that's relevant nationally as well. I see someone's going to change their student intake forms to make sure they're smart, just fine-tuning that so that they're more targeted. Allison has posted a compendium of the CEL assessments. So for folks who are wondering about where to get data, there's a great resource for you. I am practicing my teacher pause to give everyone time to enter comments if they wish. Okay, as I mentioned, there is a survey, and we would love for you to click on the link to the left and give us your feedback. We want to make sure that the information we're providing to folks is useful and informative. So follow that link, and thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye.